For this video, we will continue our file system implementation. I'm implementing a user interface for all the file system controller code we put together on the previous video. I'll be using vanilla JavaScript in an object-oriented way to put together these views and without using web components or other libraries. That way, I don't spend time explaining any library and framework, so we can focus on the mechanics of what I'm teaching you rather than the third-party or native thing. Afterwards, you can easily translate this into any library framework like React, Angular, Vue, or web components. So let's get to it. Let me first introduce you to the setup. I have here a blank page, and as you can see, there is only a div with the root ID on it. I'll also put what we built on the previous video on this file and did couple cleanup and small changes. I first made the item class an abstract class by throwing an error whenever it gets instantiated with the new keyword, allowing it only to work when you extend it. On the name setter, I added a check to make sure the name does not contain / as it would interfere with our path handlers. On the file system class, I added a copy item method that takes an item name, tries to find it, and gets a copy of it, then insert in the current directory, and that's all. Everything else was small code adjustments and spell fixes. I also added a couple things to speed up this video, so let me show you what they are. I have here a dialog base class, which is the base for any dialog we will use for consistency and quick implementation. It has a couple private properties. Subs here will contain all subscription for save and cancel actions. It has the title and options for dialog and a property to hold the dialog DOM element reference. Finally, this public data property, which is pretty much the data the dialog will output on submit, and it is meant to be overwritten. In the constructor, I set the title and override the default options here, which are just allow click out and 2 button labels. The show method is what displays the dialog, and it takes an HTML content for the body of the dialog. And first thing I do is check if there is already a dialog on the DOM and remove it. Then I add a key up event listener to the document so we can close the dialog when the user press the escape key and submit the data when the user press the enter key. Then the show method returns the result of the render, which will return the dialog DOM element reference. The render method is the one that consumes the content, and inside I create a dialog element with media modal ID. And the template is very simple. A header with a title provided, the body is the content passed, and a footer with 2 buttons, which takes the cancel and save button labels. This is appended to the container of this application. I assign the dialog reference, call setup method, and return the DOM element. The setup is where I attach event listeners to elements so things happen. As you can see here, I grab the 2 buttons and add click events to it. And if allow click out option is true, which it is by default, I listen for a click event on the document, and as long as it happen outside of a modal content element, I close the dialog. All this hide method does is remove the dialog itself from the DOM and also removes the document key up listener to avoid memory leak. If we look at the save and cancel methods, they only take a callback and push it to the respective array in subs. And all I do on cancel and submit button click handler is go through these respective lists and call each of the callbacks stored there. Now if we look at this confirm dialog, it is obvious how many code we save by extending the base dialog class. It takes title and description on initialization and calls the base dialog with super, passing the title and the button labels, and assigns description after. I override the show method and call base dialog show method with template for this dialog, which is a simple paragraph tag with description provided. The other dialog is the input dialog, which is also very simple. And here I override the data with a text string. I also set different labels for the buttons and define placeholder. And the show method has a simple template with a paragraph and an input. And I have an input listener, which I set a text value. That way, when this data is sent on dialog submit, it will contain the input value. I also set up some style so we can work with something presentable. This is not a CSS tutorial, so we focus on the JavaScript side only. And finally, the HTML file is very simple, with a simple div tag with a root ID, and it's where I'll put the media system application. I'll go ahead and create a script tag of module type, and this will allow me to do things like import files on the browser, similar to how you do on Node.js environment. And I'll import media directory from media director file, which I am yet to create. but I know it will be a class, so I'll instantiate it. And on window load, I'll call an init method on it and pass the root element to it. Now I'll create this file, and inside I'll create this media directory class with the init method that does nothing for now. I'll also export it and import file system from FS file, which we built on previous video, and I'll extend media directory with it so it has access to all its method. Now back to the init method, I'll first create my element of media container ID, and the inner HTML will be the result of a render call, which I'll handle in a minute. Then I'll just append the element to the container passed. The render method simply returns an HTML template which contains a header with the title of the media file system, and I'll have a media control bar with two parts. On the first part, I'll add the back button and a container for breadcrumbs, which I'll use the current directory path for it. On the second part, I'll add the create folder button and the upload button, which is a hidden file input wrapped in a label tag with the for attribute. Then I'll add a container wrapper with the directories and files container, which each has a title, then a paragraph for when the directory has no content. If we now check this on the browser, we see the skeleton of our application ready and styled for action since nothing works now. I'll create a setup method for the one-time setup, and I'll also grab a few DOM elements reference to help with things like the overall container and the container for directories and files, as well as the blank message so I don't query the DOM constantly. Inside setup, I'll grab the create folder, upload file, and the back button references and attach the event listeners to them. I'll create the handler method for each as well. The first thing I do is handle the create directory button click, and for that I'll import the input dialog. And if we look at it, it takes a title and a placeholder, so I'll pass create folder and folder name respectively. I'll subscribe to onSafe passing a callback which returns data that contains text, so I'll destruct it. And for now, I'll just log the folder name to test this first, right after I call show method, and go check this on the browser. I'll bring up the inspector to see the logs, and I'll click the create folder and the dialog appears. Nice. I'll input something and click save, and we can see that the folder name was logged in the console. So let's continue. I'll call create directory and pass this text returned. And if we check this method on the file system, it returns a created folder or null if you fail to insert it. So if a directory is returned, I'll append folder element to directory with a call to a method that I am yet to create passing created directory. So this method will create a div element of class folder, and it contains a paragraph tag with a folder name and another with how many items it contains. Then I'll return this, and I'll also handle go back button click, which is simple, and all it does is call go back on the system. So let's test this on the browser now. If I click on create folder button and input the name, then save, nothing seems to happen. But if I inspect this, we can see that the folder element was added. It's not showing because the directories container has displayed none. So we need to handle the case where if I have content, we hide the empty directory blank message here and show the directories and files. So I'll add a toggle blank method and check if there is content, and I'll hide blank and show directories and files. Otherwise show blank, and I'll call this right after I insert my new directory. And since we are here, I'll handle the case that creating a directory failed. So I just print the error and call show again, passing the text and the error message. Also, since we know the directory works and we handle the blank case, I'll go ahead and handle file upload, which I extract files from event target, and for each I'll create a file passing the name, no text content, and the file for the source. Remember, I spoke about source in the previous video. If the file was created, I'll insert into the files calling create file element that I'll need to create. After, I'll reset input value so it does not think it has value and refuse to let the user pick new files when clicked. And again, I'll toggle the blank. On the create element method, I'll do similar to create folder element method. The file is a figure with the empty image since these files do not have thumbnails, but it is possible to obtain thumbnail from them if we wanted to. Then a fig caption with a paragraph for name and another for type, MIME type, and size. But I'll first handle convert size of the file that is returned in bytes. I'll create an object with a byte value for kilobyte, megabyte, gigabyte, and terabyte size. Then I'll create a bytes to size method that takes bytes, and if 0, I'll just return 0 bytes. Then a switch statement where I check if bytes are less than each size and return the bytes divided by the respective size with the respective label. And now we can call this method with the file source size. And I noticed that I forgot to change file class, and the bytes logic here is wrong. It needs to be less than instead. So on the browser, I create my folder directory and proceed to upload a file, and it all seems to work fine now. Now let's add a logic to open a directory and see its content when a folder is clicked on. On the create folder element method, I'll attach a click event listener and add a method yet to be created passing it the directory item. Inside, I'll call open directory passing the folder path, but we need to re-render the directory when it happens. So I'll call a render media list method and go up to create it. And I'll just reset the title for both containers. And this is because I'll just wipe them every time. And if there is content, I'll iterate over them, creating a file when it's a file and a folder element when it's a directory item. After, I will just append them to their respective container. And again, I'll toggle blank. Since we are opening folder, I'll add handling for breadcrumbs. So I'll grab the DOM element reference and wipe it as well first. And for each name in the current directory path, I'll call the create crumb element, passing the path and the index of it. Now I create this method and it creates a div of crumb class, and content is a path item name. Then I'll get the path to it by concatenating / and current directory path sliced from 1 to index plus 1. Joined by /. The initial / is important, so the directory is opened from the root directory. Now I add a click event listener to it, which I'll quit early if current directory's name is the same name as the current crumb directory, and call open directory passing the path, and I'll call render media list to render the directory opened. I just realized that I call get track ID instead for the breadcrumbs element, and I'll also need to call render media list inside the setup. So the initial breadcrumb is created on start. And if we check the browser now, we see the root as initial breadcrumb here. I'll create my folder and click open, then create another here and then another and open. And we can see the breadcrumbs following the traversing. And if I click on one of them, it takes me straight to that directory easily, no matter which I click on. Now I want to perform actions on these items, and I want it to happen when I right click on them. So I'll add a context mun event listeners to both files and directories method. And for the handler, I'll pass the event, the item element, and the item data itself, and proceed to create this method. First thing I do is stop propagation and prevent the default right-click behavior on the browser. Then I'll create an unordered list, add action menu class, add 4 list items, 1 for each action, and I'll first position this menu at the location click happened by setting left and top client X and Y. Then I'll append it to the container. This container will be positioned absolute to the overall file system user interface. So that's why I'm only setting a left and top here, because I already set the CSS style. Another thing I need to handle is clicks anywhere on the document, which simply hides this menu, and it removes click event on the document as well as remove the menu from the DOM. I'll do the same thing right from the start to remove previous menu from the DOM before adding a new one. So let's test this on the browser first. I'll create a folder and upload a file, and when I right click on them, the menu appears where I click, and only one exists at a time, which is what we want. And if I click anywhere else, it just disappears. And right now, clicking on the items do nothing. So let's change this. First, I'll add a click listener to each action with temporary methods. Then I'll create these methods that do nothing. And for the rename, we instantiate the input dialog with the title and the input placeholder. Pass a callback to the onSave and open it with the item name. All I do is call the rename item, passing the current name and new name, and this will throw an error if the item of the same name exists or name is invalid. So I'll wrap it in a try-catch block, and if it renamed, I'll grab the item name, and both file and folder element have a p tag with class that ends with -name. So I'll grab it and change its text content, otherwise I'll catch the error and call show again, passing the item name and the error message. I'll check the browser and create 2 folders with gibberish name and then rename both of them. Navigate in and out to check if the name stays. Then I'll upload a file and proceed to rename it as well. And it seems to be working just fine. Now let's handle copy action, which just gets the item copy, and if we look, it returns null if you could not find the item. So I'll check if I got a copy. And if the item is a file, I'll attach file element built with the copied item to files, otherwise the directory container. Next, I'll handle the delete item as well, which I'll first import the confirm dialog, which if we look, it only takes a title and a description. So I'll just pass the descriptions to ensure the user wants to continue with the action. Inside on the save callback, I'll just call remove item, passing the item name, and this will return true or false. So if it has removed, I'll proceed to remove the element and call toggle blank because it may be the last item in the container and we want to show the blank state for empty directory. Let's try all this in the browser before implementing the move item action. I'll create my folder, then copy it, upload a file and copy it as well, and proceed to delete both copies. If I navigate inside and out of a directory, it seems like the actions were permanent. Great. In order to continue to implement the move item action, I'll need first to create the move item dialog. So this way you will also see the dialog being built as well. I'll create a class with sysPrivateProperty where I'll store the copy of the file system and set destination property in data. I'll set a title and label for the action button and go ahead and store the system passed. The show method sets a simple template with a div, an error message, paragraph, and an empty container. And this show method takes a path to open initially and an optional error message, and I proceed to open that folder and call the render directory method, which the first thing I do is set the destination as the current directory path and grab all directories under this current directory. Now I'll add content to the wrap, which is first the breadcrumbs, which I map current directory path and return a span tag with path as content. Then I'll join these with empty string. If there are subdirectories, I'll set an empty div, otherwise a paragraph saying that the directory has no subdirectories. Now I grab this empty div and loop over these directories, creating a div folders and attaching a click event that opens that particular directory using its path and calling render directory again to show its content. I'll also collect all the breadcrumb span tags, and for each I'll create a path similar to what I did before and attach a click event that opens the directory and calls render directory again. With that, the move item dialog is complete. So inside the move item action handler, I'll instantiate our new dialog, passing a copy of the file system, set a onSave callback, and call show with current directory path. Inside the save callback, I'll call move item to with the item name and the return destination path. And if we look, move item to may throw an error and return null. So I'll call it inside a try catch block and check for the return directory and call open directory with its path and re-render the list again. Otherwise, I'll call show again with the path and return error. On the browser, I'll create folder 1 and 2, upload a file, and proceed to move it inside folder 1. And we see now it opens folder 1 and the file is there. I'll move it now to the folder 2. Again, it opens it with success. And then I'll go to the root and move folder 2 inside folder 1 with success. For the last implementation, I'll add a search capability to this, so it's possible to search for anything now. First thing I do is add a search input field to the header control bar and a search results container as well. And on the setup, I'll grab the search field and add the input event listener to it. I'll also add the results element reference globally as well. Inside the handler, I grab the value, then proceed to clear debounce timer. And what this will do is wait for some time after I stop typing before it calls the search. That way I don't call search for every letter they type. And if value is equal or larger than 3 characters, I'll define the bounce timer with a set timeout again, which execute after 350 milliseconds. And this is how much time it waits before it starts the search. Then I proceed to call find all items, and I pass a callback since it is one of the options I have. And all I do is search on the name using newly created regex from the value. And since this returns the index, I'll check if it is greater or equal to 0, which means it found a match. Then I set search results display to block and add title saying how many items matched. Now if there are results, I'll go through each, Check if it is a file, then create an element according to if it is a file or not, along with the name of the item. Then I'll click event to it and check if it is a file. I'll use its parent path to open a directory, otherwise the directory path itself. Again, call render media list to refresh the list and set search value to empty string. After all, I then add the element to the search results container. In case there were no match, I'll append a paragraph saying that nothing was found. I will also create a method that hides the search results, since I need to hide it from two places. I call it from the outer else and inside the click handler after render list call. All it does is set the display to none and wipe its content. Now for our final browser check, I create few directories and again few files, and all I do now is start looking from them. As you can see, 3 data structure can be fun and interesting, and look what we built. Of course, this can be way more complex with more feature. You can even go ahead and implement drag and drop here, and you can see that just by having that base controller of the file system class that we created in a previous video, we can add any user interface to it using any tool we want. So that's how powerful this can be. And once again, thanks for watching. Catch you in the next one. Bye bye.